Welcome to our final panel of our two-day forum. Thank you, everybody, for your continued presence and participation. For those who weren't here yesterday, I'm Mike Snyder. I'm the current chair of the Mid-Atlantic Committee on the Ocean, and my day job is the Ocean and Great Lakes Director at the New York State Department of State. And again, we're very excited to have so many folks present here in the room, as well as folks online. And we've got a great panel for you to close us out. We're going to hear a little from folks on a number of different perspectives at different levels of government and levels of action. And I think it's really appropriate for us to close in this way because everyone here represents kind of a different community in a sense. And what we've been hearing as a common theme through the last 2 days is the need to continue to look for connections, whether it's connectivity between ecosystems and people, or problems and opportunities, or data and action. Those connections are why we're here, and connections across different levels of action and levels of government or levels of community is really what the Mid-Atlantic Committee on the Ocean and our partnership here at the forum is all about. So I think this is a great way for us to kind of close out and propel forward as we think about how to move into the next year's activities. Our first speaker is Deerin Babb-Brott. For those of you who don't know Deerin, he's a very well-established champion of ocean policy issues with experience at multiple levels of government and a staunch advocate of regional ocean partnerships for which we are eternally grateful. And Deerin will be talking a little bit today about things from the national perspective, giving us a little bit of an overview on some of the challenges that we collectively face. So Deerin, I'm going to start turning it over to you.
Great. Thank you very much. And great to be here with you guys and to be here with all of you. Thank you for the opportunity. Just to clarify at the top, I'm here today in my personal capacity, so words, you can attribute them to me, not to any other affiliation I may have. And I am a staunch advocate of ROPs, and I'm actually going to talk just a little bit about that. I'm going to be brief and give my time back to my colleagues and then for the discussion with all of you. And I'm going to say things that you know, and that, you know, when you get up in the morning and put your feet on the cold floor, this is why you do it. And I know you know that, but I want to give it a twist at the end and words of encouragement and action going forward. There is and has been a lot of support for regional approaches to ocean and coastal management over time. You can go back to the Pew and U.S. Ocean Commissions. You can probably go back farther than that, right? Regionalism makes sense. It's the cornerstone of a number of important approaches to how we think about and engage the world around us, whether that's ocean observing system regional associations, fishery management councils, regional ocean partnerships, you know, others that are either formal or informal out there in the world. We sometimes jokingly talk about regional ocean partnerships around the office as being the Goldilocks scale, right? It is bigger than states, but it is smaller than the federal government. Federal government does a lot of things well, does a lot of things not so well. It sometimes reminds me in moments of frustration of a quote from a literary critic who described Henry James' literary style as that of a hippopotamus diligently and laboriously trying to pick up a pea, right? We don't do things very well at the scale that you can do them and that you can be successful in doing them. So if we think about going back to the Pew and U.S. Ocean Commission, think about now the work that you and your colleague regions have done to establish a record of success that has led to the authorization bill from Congress, right? Congratulations. Congress says you're real. To annual appropriations under Republican and Democratic administrations, right? To significant resources in the bipartisan infrastructure law and the IRA, right? What those have led to continuing that chain is things like the Regional Wildlife Science Collaborative, which is an entirely unique and sui generis creation made possible by that track record of success and the resources that you bring to it every day by catch as catch can, but also now that have been formalized through those kinds of legislative resources. So consistent and growing support and recognition for the value of regional ocean partnerships. Capacity, knowledge, engagement, action, and solutions. Recognition on the Hill in Republican and Democratic administrations and agency staff about the capacity of what you are able to do. Looking at the work plans from each of the 4 regions and distributing those around the EOP and to agencies, it's incredibly impressive when you look at the MARCO work plan, NROC work plan from the other places, right? These are things that directly advance the federal interest, that directly advance the state interest, and everybody working together. The thing that we're trying to leverage and to advance is the visibility of that and the knowledge of, even within agencies, of the work that their own people are doing as part of an ROP or as part of MARCO, right? There is still in some cases a perspective that the ROP, that MARCO is different, right? It's like this individual thing out there, and the conversation is no, BOEM, you're part of that. DOI, you're part of that. No, you're part of that. And that's sort of unequally distributed across the agencies. But it's an important piece. The good news is that that appreciation is growing, and it's leading to this kind of support. So the thing that I want to leave with that's maybe different here is you guys have more ability to affect change at the federal level in a way that redounds back to you to help you get done what you want to get done than you realize. And you've passed a moment of critical mass, right? That's really the key piece here. Within the agencies, on the Hill and other places, you've passed a moment of critical mass, and you have the ability to change the weather, right? In a way that you may not appreciate, ways that introduce frustration and bring with it all kinds of other things, right? But as we talk about things like the Ocean Climate Action Plan, other administration initiatives, how do we address wind, right? Again, think about RWSC, something that has been created out of regional needs, interests, and whatever, but that has brought agencies along with it, that has introduced a new way to solve a problem. You have that power and that ability across the board, and I encourage you to think more about that and to use that and to leverage change around you in ways that you may not do right now. So stop there and look forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Deerin. We're powerful. That's what I got out of that. So let's go with that. Our next panelist is Kristi Lieske. Kristi is going to be providing the state perspective, and Kristi is an ocean planner at the Delaware Department of Natural Resources and Environmental Control. So take it away, Kristi.
Thank you, Mike. And I just want to say thank you to the session leaders for inviting me to this panel. I'm honored and humbled to be in a place I get to be with these intelligent and hardworking individuals. I'm like seriously fangirling right now. When I was young, I used my hard-earned chore money one day to take it to the Scholastic Fair at my school, and I bought a book. This book, Baby Whale by Lynn Wilson. And I've been hooked on the ocean ever since. And I spent the rest of my days learning and soaking up as much information as I could about the world ocean. And now I'm in a place where I get to talk about the ocean every single day. And it's pretty amazing that I get to affect change, even if it's a small part of this larger effort that we're all participating in to preserve the ocean for our future's sake. In Delaware, we've always recognized and acknowledged our reliance on our ocean economy. But as we've heard the past 2 days, the demand for ocean space is escalating more quickly than ever before. And the marine resources and human infrastructure are being threatened by climate change. So we've never been more urgent in our intentions in Delaware to ensure we're planning for the sustainability of our ocean and bay, along with the benefits that they provide us. So I'm excited to say that Delaware is developing a state-specific Delaware Ocean and Bay Plan to address these challenges. It became very clear early in our process that the impact that Delaware's blue economy has on our state. And for our purposes, we included the Delaware Bay and the ocean off our coast in the economic contributions for the ocean economy. We may be a small state, but we're a long and narrow state with over 381 miles of shoreline from top to bottom. So we get a lot of opportunities to interact with marine resources, So it's no surprise that the recreation and tourism sector is the largest economic contributor to our blue economy, bringing in almost $950 million on an annual basis, followed by our maritime industry and commercial fishing industry. Maintaining these industries and addressing potential threats to the value they provide us is a substantial part of our developing ocean and bay plan. One of those threats being the degradation of coastal and ocean ecosystems. Delaware's beaches are coveted for their pristine quality and the habitats they support, providing visitors and residents with a truly unique experience, like throwing a line out into the water from your car and having your gear right there, seeing the otherworldly spectacle of horseshoe crabs, thousands of them on the beach spawning, and sitting on a beach chair and just seeing a pod of dolphins leaping into the air. It's the natural beauty of our coastal ecosystems and the vibrant coastal economy that makes Delaware a place where visitors want to come spend their vacation time, and an even better place for us to live. So building off the Mid-Atlantic Ocean Action Plan, the Delaware Ocean and Bay Plan will provide an opportunity to address marine resource management issues by providing a comprehensive, easy-to-use resource for decision makers, resource managers, and members of the public. It will identify and describe the marine resources and human uses that are occurring within our planning area, the Delaware Bay, and off the coast of our shore, and describe how they interact with each other, their level of compatibility, and then it will go to suggest practices for better coexisting these things together. And knowing that resources and uses are managed or studied across multiple levels of government, academia, and private sectors, we scheduled and met individually with 60 organizations to understand what would be valuable to them in a state plan, what challenges they're dealing with, and what their needs are. We heard across multiple organizations about the potential economic opportunities associated with offshore renewable energy, while noting the challenges with supply chain and ensuring equity and inclusivity throughout planning. And yesterday we heard all about transmission. That was a big theme across our interviews as well. We heard interest in addressing both the positive and negative impacts of port facilities as home to one of the major ports on the East Coast, and increasing commercial vessel traffic. And we are constantly reminded of the value that recreation and tourism brings to our state. The benefits of wildlife watching, birding, surfing, paddleboarding, but we also heard about the challenges associated with human disturbance to the natural environment and access issues. So the input received during those meetings is directly informing the overall scope of the Ocean and Bay Plan, which will be supplemented with extensive public engagement that we plan to hold this summer. So since this is the last session of the day, I'm also going to copy Deerin in kind of giving a charge for action. I encourage you all to not only stay up to date on the Delaware Ocean and Bay Plan progress, and share your thoughts with us, please, but to take all of the information that you've heard in the past 2 days and bring it home with you. Don't let it stay here in the U.S. Customs House in New York City. Make those connections with people, especially that you may not have gotten to before. It's going to take all of us working together to find solutions and find common ground. And I think one of the most important things that we can do is to get young people excited about the ocean. Keisha alluded to this responsibility yesterday of protecting the ocean for our future, our kids' future, and the young ones we love. I'm sure each of you has your own story of why you do what you do, your own version of my whale book story. And I can even see it beginning in my own son, who's 2.5 years old. A couple weeks ago, I let him watch NOAA's Okeanos ship exploring the deep Pacific with me, and I didn't think he would be very interested, but he was glued to the screen, and he every time something moved across the frame, he would gasp and point, and he was like, "Oh, fish, fish." And he was just so excited. The curiosity is there. We just have to spark it. Thanks for listening.
Thank you, Kristi. And like the whale in your book, the states are small but mighty. And I think we can inspire others to action. So thank you very much for your words. Next up, speaking at a regional perspective, we have Amy Trice. Amy is a senior program director at the Northeast Regional Ocean Council. So Amy, take it away.
Hi, everyone. So I think Deerin did my job for me, so I'm done. No, but seriously, it's really lovely to be here and see a lot of familiar faces. I know many of us out there in the audience, we've been engaged in this a really long time, and around this concept of sustainable ocean economy for a while. We've seen various iterations and gone through, I think, many buzzwords: coastal marine spatial planning, ocean planning. Now I think we're sort of more in the integrated ocean management concept. But when I think about this work and why we've all invested all the time we have, and why we've been supportive of this concept for so long, it's really this idea of a more comprehensive approach, one where we can talk to one another and hear other people's values and try to balance those needs. You heard a lot of that in the last session of how do we balance conservation and offshore wind and these types of things. So, from my perspective, and obviously bias here, but I see this comprehensive approach of how we talk to one another and balance values as really the beginning of the solutions that we're all looking at when it comes to ocean and coastal management. And so thinking about what that means in a regional context, and sort of building on a bit of what Deerin was discussing at the federal level, thinking about how this work aligns at different geographic scales. So, the state plan and how that feeds into more of a regional perspective. And really, I do think it is that sweet spot of looking at what a specific region needs, what the value system is for that particular region, bringing in what the communities want in that particular region. And to me, that's one of the big lessons learned over all these years of us doing this work is each region is different. There are different regional management contexts that we operate in, and being respectful and open to those ideas that what works in New England may not be what works in the Gulf of Mexico, and sort of recognizing those regional flexibility and management and differences. So even though there are those differences, when I think of some of the work happening at the federal level, thinking about the national strategy for a sustainable ocean economy and some of those pieces, I do think there are still similar themes within, across regions. An example is something around climate, for example, and going back to that sort of Gulf of Mexico versus New England concept. In the Gulf of Mexico, thinking about climate and impacts from increasing hurricanes, for example, the Gulf of Mexico Alliance they're focusing more on coastal hazard resilience, and that's what makes sense for the Gulf and sort of what makes sense for the communities there. Whereas in New England, the Gulf of Maine is really the sort of epicenter for a lot of shifting baselines, and what is that going to look like over time? And so, thinking about management concepts in terms of fishing community impacts and what does that mean long term as things happen in the Gulf of Maine. And then I guess trying to sort of focus this work a little more specifically on the Northeast Regional Ocean Council, and I think over the 2 days you all kind of have the concept of NROC, but we're the counterpart essentially to Marco, and it's from the states from Maine all the way down to Connecticut and federal agencies. We're also engaging directly with New England tribes and the Fishery Management Council, and then there's obviously all the ocean users and communities that are part of that. And then you heard Emily talk a bit on the last panel about the Northeast Regional Ocean Data Portal, the Regional Wildlife Science Collaborative, and all that is incredibly great and wonderful work, but I want to make the point that that's centered on what the region has said is important, right? Those are the ocean and coastal management priorities and the needs that people have come together and said, this is what we need for the region to be successful. We can't do this alone as a state, and 1 + 1 is going to be 10 if we go about it this way. So that sort of regional need of expressing what would be helpful from an ocean and coastal management perspective, I think is really valuable. And at NROC, we're doing this, and as it relates to the sustainable ocean economy and sort of the theme of this session, we're doing this in 3 various committees. There's the Coastal Hazard Resilience Committee, the Ocean Planning Committee, and the Ocean and Ecosystem Health Committee. And I think a lot of us in this room, and I know Marco has as well, is a lot of us have benefited now from the bipartisan infrastructure law and a lot of the funding that is coming to do really great work and projects that a lot of the people in the audience, you know, we've participated in work plans, we've helped develop these visions for a long time, and it's been really great to start to have the resources to really advance the type of projects that move the ball forward and really get at some of these big questions that we've been trying to answer. And so I do want to leave a lot of time for discussion, so I just thought I'd kind of give you some examples of those types of projects that we're thinking about now. And these are just a few. There's a lot more on our website, and you can see in the various work plans. But just a few examples, putting water level sensors across the region. So working to identify what various states and communities need related to water level sensors and monitoring. Advancing mapping and modeling of blue carbon stores, obviously really critical when we think about some of the climate goals, and ties into a lot of the work of the Ocean Climate Action Plan that Deerin referenced. Developing a regional ocean and coastal ocean acidification network. Also identifying priority areas for seafloor mapping. We know, for example, in the Gulf of Maine that we're going to be building floating offshore wind, and there's areas that we don't have really good data on the seafloor. So how can we as a region identify priority areas and then actually fund that work and get it done, and then collaborate with universities or various federal agencies that are out there and really start to prioritize where those data needs are. And then also things like advancing interjurisdictional best practices around ocean permitting and management. So these are things around how do the states and federal agencies and tribes, the Fishery Management Council, you know, various stakeholders, how do we interact, and what are some of those best practices to actually advance this more effectively. And I'll just conclude with, you know, again, hoping we can dig into this a bit more, and obviously hugely biased here, but I really do think regional ocean partnerships are really that scale to really advance and solve a lot of these questions we've been asking over the last 2 days. And, you know, I've heard a lot over the past 2 days around collaboration, engagement, talking with one another, and I just think regional ocean partnerships like Marco and NROC are really the solution to a lot of that collaboration. And it's been really cool to see over the past decade or so where these groups have gone, and I think we're slowly we're iterating into sort of the next generation of ocean and coastal management, and it's all really exciting. So thank you all for having me.
Thank you, Amy. And I'm going to borrow your new math, your new regional math, where 1 + 1 = 10, because I think it does really, it may not be factually correct, but I think it does reflect that sort of exponential power, in a way, of the regions in terms of elevating what we do. Our final speaker joining us virtually is Alexandra Carter from the Urban Ocean Lab, where she is a policy director. So, Alexandra, I'm going to turn it over to you to close out our panel before we launch into discussion.
Thank you, and thank you for having me on this panel. I'm really grateful for, you know, the organizers of the forum to include the city perspective. You know, at Urban Ocean Lab, we are an ocean and climate policy think tank for the future of coastal cities. And so, you know, as a couple of my co-panelists mentioned in their introductory statements, not all levels of government work at the same scale, and it's going to be essential for us to include cities and communities in this whole of government approach, not only thinking of it as an interagency whole of government approach, but a multi-scaled level that requires different actions from different government agencies and different levels of government in order to create a sustainable ocean economy, and in a way that accounts for climate change, accounts for ocean risks, and makes sure that it benefits the communities and the cities that are at the forefront of these issues. Right now, about 1 in 5 Americans live in US coastal cities. And our coastal cities are more diverse when compared to the national average, with nearly 60% of US coastal city populations identifying as Black, Indigenous, and people of color. Our coastal cities are both disproportionately impacted by climate change and are also the perfect places for innovative policy that can be replicated across other cities and scaled to other levels of government. So when focused on sustainable ocean economies, our cities are, some of the epicenters of where those economies happen. And thinking about how to create a sustainable ocean economy starts with making sure that our cities are also ready to take on the unique challenges and opportunities that present them at this intersection of economic, ocean, and climate policy. And so at Urban Ocean Lab, we work with and for US coastal cities to develop ocean climate policy for healthier, more resilient, and climate-ready cities and coastal communities nationally. And I think when you think about, a sustainable ocean economy, and you think about how we can do that, it really must include good jobs for the people that are there. It can include involving communities reliant on those ocean resources that both fuel the economy and also provide benefits to everybody who lives on the coast. And it involves protecting the ocean resources for the future as well as benefits now. So looking forward to talking more about how each one of our perspectives can come together to facilitate better management and better planning around making sure that our ocean economy is sustainable, is ready for the future, and benefits the communities and the cities that live on that intersection.
Great, thank you. And certainly the cities are, including the city we're in now, at the forefront of a lot of these challenges. And we're proving grounds, I think, in a sense, for some of the solutions and some of the opportunities. So we're going to handle this panel a little differently. We're going to try to make it more of a discussion, a little more free-flowing. We do have a few questions that I think we'll try to generally stick to, but I'm also open to wherever the panelists would like to take this discussion. I will say, since we're in the Alexander Hamilton Courthouse, and since I have a 12-year-old daughter who made me listen to Hamilton like 50 times during the pandemic, I'm going to do, I'm not going to sing. We had a threat of song in the beginning of the forum, and now there's another threat of song, but it's not going to happen. I will just give you some snippets of lyrics, and those who know the songs, you're going to be stuck singing them in your head for your entire ride home. The first one is Oceans Rise and Empires Fall. So we're here in New York. Obviously, this is a place that has experienced some severe flooding. I walked down to the seaport last night, and just reading a little bit about it, I didn't realize the seaport was under over 6 feet of water during Sandy. That's taller than me. That's how I measure what's tall. So that's a lot. That's a lot of water, right? And it's still there. It's still functioning. People still visit it. It's still a tourism place. But thinking about the ocean generally, this climate issue is here. It's here now. It's here today. And the ocean economy is really at the fore of the need for climate action. So as we think about the need to take action now, but then also balancing that with, I think this theme we've heard over the last couple of days of the long view. How do we plan for sustainable economies in ways that get things done now that need to be done, but also take that longer view? And I'm not going to pick on any panelists unless nobody volunteers, in which case I will.
I can start. So yeah, I appreciate that question because that really resonated with me yesterday when Keisha first brought it up, kind of that long-term perspective. And I know specifically for Delaware, when we were conducting those stakeholder meetings to really try to understand what needs were out there as far as ocean planning challenges, we heard a lot about considering emerging and potential future uses of the ocean space, as well as cumulative impacts of multiple activities over space and time. And I really appreciated the ocean conservation session talk about cumulative impacts and the new models that are out there for assessment, and especially with Emily Shumchinia's presentation on our WSC and the need for data standardization. I think that's something that over long term, that's going to make a big difference in our planning and in our decision making on all levels. So I think that it's really important to hear from people about what they're thinking about in the future. What we might be thinking may not necessarily be what other people are thinking about, especially, from a state perspective. I know I wouldn't be thinking about the things that maybe a local community person living where sea level rises is affecting them every day, what they're thinking about. And so I think that, hearing from those people that are being impacted by emerging issues is really important.
Maybe I'll add a few things. I think particularly thinking about the data component, I'm a total data nerd, but I love the concept of also the conversations that go along with what that data means. And particularly when you're thinking about human activities, right? It's not just, here's the AIS data for ship traffic and boom, that's on the data portal and the end, right? It's about the conversations with the people around what are future trends, where trade routes may be changing, how is climate change going to be brought into that? And I think the more we can have conversations about, it's not just now, but what are these future scenarios? And some of the work that Pat was talking about, and some of those sort of, how do we bring in these innovative components, I think are ways that we start to get at this long-term climate planning. But I think ultimately it has to start with conversations with fishermen or local communities or the maritime industry of what are you seeing on the water now? What are the future scenarios, and how do we start to plan more holistically for those changing conditions? And so I like the idea of that sort of, yes, the data, yes, the science, but also the sort of community conversation component as well.
And I think to add on to that, the importance of involving communities, and when you make policy with communities, the policy is more staying, it lasts longer. And so thinking about planning ahead for the long term, meaningfully involving the communities and the cities that these policies are being implemented in is such an important step. And not only meaningfully involving them in the decision-making process and the creation of the policy from the very beginning, but follow through and commitment to those pieces, including adequately resourcing your communities and your cities for these kinds of solutions, making sure that frontline communities and communities that have been historically disproportionately impacted by the climate crisis already are not also carrying a disproportionately high amount of the burden of the transition into sustainable ocean economies. And making sure that in that follow through, communities and cities are involved and resourced for the operation and maintenance of these solutions, and in the implementation of the way that policy is carried out. And I think when we can do that from a community up in a city focused space, it allows you to plan for the long term in a way that's going to have community support and community buy-in for the long run.
Two quick things. First, Mike, to go back to the very beginning, and Alexander Hamilton, Oceans Rise, Empires Fall. Today in the New York Post, Alexander Hamilton, there's the headline that says New York City is sinking under its own weight. Trillions and trillions of tons is depressing the city, and that's making it more vulnerable to future impacts of sea level rise. Alex, you probably know the source of the study. You all may also, but just there you are, the New York Post, as our source of authority today. Answering the sort of getting out of the question, I'd like bring together pieces from each of my colleagues up here, and maybe take Alex's and just expand it outward to not limit it to her constituency, but to think about everybody, right? A couple of years ago, the United States joined the high-level panel for a sustainable ocean economy, which provides an international frame for this conversation. The signature commitment the United States made in doing so was that it would, within 5 years, develop a sustainable ocean plan, which addresses all the things that we're talking about here. So the U.S. will be doing that, and there'll be more to follow publicly relatively soon. But what I would say is, how do we, Mike, the question was, how do we do this? We do it by thinking affirmatively and with intention about actions that we need to take to protect the source of health and security and value in the natural world, and how we achieve the kind of social values we want in the future by way of our interaction with that system, that natural system, and to use it to affect the things that we need to accomplish to protect ourselves from the impacts of climate change, right? So we think about the integrity of natural systems, and then we think about the need to provide equity in terms of participating in and access to the value and the benefits of that. We think about how do we derive economic benefit, how do we derive security benefit. We think explicitly and act according to how we think explicitly, right? It's there to be done. There's a paradigm shift, but we're in the middle of it. We're aware of the terms, we're aware of the implications. So we do it at the different scales. Different regions have different ways of solving problems. We map that to higher level values and higher level ways of doing business, and then apply that across the country.
Can I maybe tie your piece on that back to what I think Marco is doing with the Regional Ocean Data Portal, and what New England is doing as well, is when I think about equity and the sort of baseline for that, it's starting to have transparent and open data and information that everyone is able to access and to make decisions on, and to have that all in one place. And it's incredibly difficult to look through the Federal Register unless you're getting paid to do that for a living. And just the ability to have access to sort of those federal actions and the information that's being used to make informed decisions, I think leads to the baseline when we can start to have conversations about public access and equity and those types of things that Allie's getting at with community engagement, and how do they get brought into the conversation around climate, and it just sort of builds on each other. But I do think we're starting to create the baseline for those types of conversations to be more meaningful.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Amy. And Kristi, did you want to build on that?
I was just going to build quickly, sorry, that I think it's Marco and NROC are doing an excellent job at, what you said, trying to raise awareness around access issues, and really making sure that everyone has access and it's transparent, and everyone has the resources they need. And I think that's where the states and the communities can really step up as well, because as we zoom in, it'll be easier on a smaller scale to really raise awareness for these ocean challenges and get people engaged in a way that they feel connected to the ocean and to the issues that are happening around them. And sometimes it takes emergencies, and sometimes it takes drastic changes to do that. And but I think that building trust, like we talked about earlier with during the allyship session, building relationships, which leads hopefully to trust, is a really key point of that.
Thanks, Kristi. And I think that's such an important point as we think about the work that we need to do and the folks that we're working with, and that other word that was put forward during the allyship exercise, which is accountability. For those who are online and aren't here and able to experience the building, there's around the lobby outside of the auditorium here, there are a number of copies of treaties with some of the tribal nations that were present in America. And as a native of upstate New York, I was very interested in looking at some of these treaties and reading about them, which was also a bit sobering, because you see the very first treaty that the U.S. ever signed with a tribal nation, very little of it was honored. And we heard a little bit in one of the panels yesterday on tribal data about overcoming bad history and overcoming mistrust. And based on our commitment, and it's a real commitment to take an equitable and an inclusive and a just approach, are there things we can do besides providing the data in an accessible way? And as somebody who does get paid to read the Federal Register, I still don't like doing it. How else can we do this? How else can we really make a meaningful step forward so that truly we can say people are in the room where it happens, right? Thank you, Hamilton.
I think another step on top of making sure that data and resources are accessible and available to everybody is building capacity within communities that are affected. And that can look like having the time to look through the Federal Register, or having the expertise to evaluate resources and to review technical papers and documents. A lot of the communities that we hear from and a lot of the cities we talk to really voice the needs and the concerns to build that capacity in order to engage meaningfully in the policy creation, in order to be more prepared for climate change impacts and to build a more sustainable economy in their region.
And I guess I could talk a little bit, I mean, at least in New England, resources are incredibly helpful, and I mentioned the bill funding, the bipartisan infrastructure law funding, that has now allowed us, we're have the ability to hire a tribal liaison now and start to have conversations with tribes and around, how would you like to engage with them, right? What are the types of priorities that you care about? Are there capacity needs? And I think is that enough? No, but does that start to help us get there? I hope so, but it's a hard one, right? There's so much to balance, and so how do we start to really move things forward and start to answer questions that are management challenges that are happening now? How do we answer questions around paleocultural resources as offshore wind advances, and sort of that political, the political calculation and climate mitigation needs potential around wind, but also the questions around resources, and it's always a balance. And I think to the extent we can provide data, information, capacity, and meet people where they are, that hopefully starts to get us more in that direction.
Coming back to the theme of the regions can inform national, federal behavior. I was not being rude and doing company business on my cell phone while Amy was speaking. I was just making sure I was going to quote accurately from the Ocean Climate Action Plan that Mackenzie talked about yesterday, which in the first section on cross-cutting principles and actions talks exactly about this issue, and says that through the Ocean Policy Committee, the federal agencies, in addition to their own actions, will be looking for creative opportunities to continue to build on the commitment that has been made, right? So I would encourage and sort of reinforce the message that, yes, that will be happening there, but I would love to have that build on what Marco puts forward or what evolves in this regional conversation, what evolves out of the Northeast Regional Ocean Council, what evolves West Coast Gulf, right? That's sort of the ability to continue to build and reinforce, and it can really only be done that way. I mean, one of the things that we thought about early on was work done as part of the West Coast Ocean Alliance by the West Coast Ocean Alliance Tribal Treaty Caucus, right? And the guidance document that they put forth, right? So I'd like to have the opportunity to put that kind of nuts and bolts material up in lights in play as guidance across the board. Other examples as we can. So.
Yeah, Deerin just mentioned a lot of different resources that we have to look to and to learn from. And I think that, you know, Amy said it's hard, and it is hard. I don't have a fraction of the answers I would like to have in regards to this challenge. But fortunately, in Delaware, we recently got to hire a environmental justice coordinator. And for the Ocean and Bay Plan, we met prior to really planning out our public engagement pieces, and we're incorporating her feedback about, you know, really trying to get them into the process in a time where they feel like they still have an option to change the course and to provide their input that will be meaningful and that we follow through. And I think that's really, really important to do is following through and making sure that they know how their comments, how their feedback is going to be used, and actually see that being used. So it's really accountability again. I forget my train of thought, but I think that we really want to focus on finding those people that are trusted within the communities as well, whether it be like social media influencers, political parties, wherever you can find that trusted person, and start with them to really start to build that relationship, and then move outward from there. Was something that I know I'm striving for in our planning aspects, to make sure that we're engaging diverse and inclusive voices.
We have a saying in New York, maybe you've heard it, talk is cheap, right? So we want to see action. People want to see results. They want to see, as you said, Kristi, they want to see that they actually have a chance to change an outcome. And then they want to see that outcome changed. It's kind of demanding when you think about it. People actually want to be part of a process and actually influence it. I think it's really challenging for us as government to be responsive in a meaningful way. I think we're used to maybe a status quo, business as usual case where we collect feedback, right, comments, it's formal. We have a way of addressing them by basically dispensing with them in some cases. But are we really taking them to heart and using them as a catalyst for meaningful change and doing things a little differently? And I think evolution is a difficult theory for everybody who isn't a biologist, because it requires accepting that change is normal and that change is important for the health of the overall community and the ecosystem. So yeah, piece of cake. I think we can knock this out pretty quickly. I do think, though, that having the representatives that we do on this panel reflects the commitment at those different levels. And it's been said that it must be nice to have Washington on your side. So with that in mind, are there things that we can do to bridge these different levels? How do we go from all the way down at that hyper-local neighborhood scale and then zoom it out to that national level and be able to kind of work across those different levels, knowing that we have to satisfy those needs, whether they're identified regionally or locally, but we have to do it using this, as you said, Deerin, and I'm going to paraphrase, this kind of unwieldy apparatus of a federal government that controls so much of what we do.
It's why I push like hell on using regions more and using regions better and taking advantage of the capacity in this room, right? Because regions are already an aggregator from the scale at which the federal government simply can't operate, right? The federal government cannot serve as a selectman in evaluating the impact of sea level rise on the town beach and whether or not you build a seawall, really important things if you read your local paper, fist fights in the aisles of town hall over that kind of thing, right? But that can build up into a body of knowledge that the region can serve and can assist governors and state reactions, those kind of things. It may be a dumb example, but you know where I'm going with that, right? So I look at the regions as sort of the ability to gather that information and put that forward in a way that represents understanding that there's lots of variability within the region itself and respecting that, but as a reasonable way of beginning the conversation, starting there. So from a national perspective, I think about that. One quick thing, so going back to your accountability and those kind of pieces. I feel like, and I know there, Laura, I know you must, there are lots of people in the room, Mike, you have as a state person, you stand in front of enough rooms and enough public meetings, in the evening and propose and then defend a governor's proposal to do something, you take a lot of slings and arrows and you learn viscerally the importance of being accountable and being responsible and being genuine, whether you agree with or you don't agree with what's being hurled at you, offered to you, or discussed, right? There isn't some disconnect that's there. You're present, you live it, you earn the ability to be part of that conversation, right? So it's one of the things I'm most grateful about having had a fairly long career doing this kind of stuff. It never gets any easier, but what does get easier is knowing the value of that commitment going in is more important than anything that could happen to you as being part of the process that you're going to jump into, right? It's like deep magic. So.
Well put. Anyone else?
I don't know how to follow. I'm sort of thinking about your, regional context and what's the right scale, and thinking a bit about. I hate the idea of engagement to say what do you need, what do you feel, those types of things. I love the idea. People are incredibly stretched thin, and so having an action or having something for people to react to, I think is on the regions to really get the best information about what a particular community needs. I think that's what leads to real engagement is around things like, we have this idea or concept, or here's some data that we think maybe represents your use that we've heard. Can you tell us about what this means? And just thinking more about the way that we interact with people and the types of questions that we're asking, because I think the old model was a lot around it felt like box checking exercise in a bit, or we've talked to you once, and so I think the way to get more meaningful input is to do a lot of the upfront work and to have people react to things. When I used to work a lot with congressional staff and that sort of thing, that was always sort of like the magic and the secret sauce, right? Is like, if you did the work, then they were most likely going to take up your policy or your thing, and I think it's the same concept, right? As people are incredibly busy, so how can we understand what those broad needs are, and then start to go with at least the beginnings of something for people to react to, rather than just tell us all your things and we'll take that and we'll go off and do our thing and never come back to you with that. So I think it's iterative, it's building trust, it's having conversations, and having meaningful products as part of that.
I have two things to add also to the concept of like, how do we bridge these gaps between different levels of government and different actors within interdisciplinary problem solving situations. I think one thing that can't be understated is recognizing that the ocean, economic ties, and climate change don't always stop at geographic borders. And so thinking about how do we work together in a non-transactional way to build relationships by facilitating knowledge and experience sharing opportunities, creating networks of cities that can work together in order to implement climate solutions within a lot of different cities, nationally or globally, or working with communities of practice who have maybe thought about a specific solution and implemented it, and being able to help communities solve their problems by sharing and communicating together is something that I think can bridge some of those gaps. And the way that I see it scaled up through the different levels of government is the opportunities at a regional or at a state or federal organizing body can facilitate those opportunities to create these networks and get these convening sessions so that folks can come together at forums like this and talk about how we are thinking about solutions and what kind of issues do need to be addressed next.
And to echo what pretty much everyone has said, and especially Deerin with the regional bodies that exist, maybe just to give a little bit more specific of an example, is that they're really bridging the gap between communities and the federal government, because for me specifically, I'm connected to both through my state work, and then connected to the federal government through Marco. And in a project that we're doing to reduce reduce single-use plastic water bottles, we're putting in water refilling stations in communities, waterfront communities along the East Coast in the Mid-Atlantic. And I'm able to use my connections to these small communities and get them connected to this larger effort that they are interested in. They are seeing the impacts of marine debris, and they're seeing this influx of plastic, especially during the pandemic. And I think that I just think that the value that Marco brings and the other regional bodies that they bring can't be understated in connecting the states to those communities and to the federal government. So I think they play a really big role in all of the ocean planning things.
Super quick, just one last piece. What's really refreshing on the federal side is just a cold question that comes from states and from ROPs sometimes. Why? What's in it for us, right? We want to do this grand scheme. We want to save the world. Here's a new thing we've cooked up, right? What's in it for us? Why should we do this? It's a really healthy, good question because it focuses, right?
Yeah, and I think back to what you said earlier too, Deerin, it connects people to something authentic, right? And I think even my question is a little misleading because it implies that people are different, whether they're at a federal, a regional, a state, or a community level. It's all the same people, right? I might work in a state, but I live in a neighborhood. I still, pay taxes to the federal government. So I think those connections are there if we choose to see them, or we can choose to see that we're, in different places and we have to somehow pretend to be something that we're not. So I like that, that the exercise we did earlier today referred to, being your authentic self and reflecting on people's authentic selves. And I think that maybe there's something there that we can all try to work into our daily work. I just want to close on maybe a hopeful note and give you all an opportunity to do so. Maybe there's a lot of things we haven't done, but just you wait, all right? So I'm not going to stop. I'm not throwing away my shot here. So on that note, what really excites you, right? We're all in this. We're all passionate about this. This is our work. We chose to be part of these 2 days. So where do you see the sort of opportunity here? Where do you think there's something that we can really build on? And where do you see something that gets you out of bed after a long sleepless night worrying about the ocean?
This room, everybody in this room. You know, we're in the middle of a new paradigm. We have the opportunity to define our future in a new way, right? We're looking at things that are incredibly scary and challenging and difficult and expensive and awful, but we're also finding our better selves and applying ourselves in new ways. And if you don't, you know, it's hopefulness. It's you know, it's reaching out your hand and being willing to work hard and to jump, right? I mean, that's life anyway, right? What's not to be hopeful, what's not to be optimistic about, right? It's this incredible amount of energy and commitment reflected in this room times 1 million, times 335, 350 million, you know, whatever the latest count is, you know, times the global population, right? That's who we are, this is what we do, so let's do it.
I'm not sure why I keep choosing to go after you. It's not fun. I'll go more micro scale. It's just, you know, I have been working on ocean planning for over a decade, and it's been small incremental things that have been really cool to see. You know, we used to have to beg people to even mention regional ocean partnerships in a congressional bill, or for an agency who was part of the ROP to actually put that on their website, you know, or for regional ocean data portals to be used in this way when we were talking about wind energy or aquaculture or these things. So it's been cool to just see the sort of momentum and incremental change that has happened with that. And then, you know, Congress getting behind the Regional Ocean Partnership Act, and, you know, these are all in the grand scheme kind of small ball things, but it's cool to see that momentum. And when you put policy in, you know, you put hard work and education and trying to show the value of these things for them to be adopted in that way, and to that vision to be taken hold, that is to me really inspiring. And then just getting to work with like the smartest, most wonderful people who, you know, who are authentic and smart and genuine, and who care about not only, you know, nerdy marine mammal data, but also just like your daily life, is like, it's a pretty cool, awesome job to have. And you know, there's a ton of us doing that, and I think to me that's inspiring. And then just getting to try to lift. It's interesting to be in this stage in my career where you know, there are people coming to you that now say, how did you get this job? Or like, what are the types of things I can do to do this? And it's so cool to try to, you know, mentor people and hopefully help them move along in their career and uplift them, and give them the space they need to do cool, interesting work. To me, that's such a privilege to be able to do, and that's incredibly exciting.
I hate to copy you guys, but I mean, it really is those connections you make with people who have the same interest and same excitement as you. When I meet someone new, working in the same field or somewhere similar, and they're like excited about what I'm doing and I'm excited about what they're doing, I just go home and I'm like, wow, I love my job. This is amazing. There's people out there that really love this stuff, and it really makes me just want to keep going and keep trying really hard. So just I think that it's really great when we get to have these types of forums and these types of meetings where we get to meet all the people who are working in various aspects and who love the same things you do.
At the beginning of my career, I worked at a state fish and wildlife agency doing fisheries data collection. And I had the privilege of, you know, meeting a lot of fisheries data scientists who are really working on how do we manage this resource sustainably so that it can support blue economies for a long time, and so that it can support the people that have relied on this resource for a long time. And I met this scientist who said, hey, want to see something really, really cool? And I said, okay. And he walks over and he has this small little glow stick. And he was like, if we attach these to the fishing gear that the trawlers use, it reduces Eulicon like bycatch by like over 90%. and Ulicon was this endangered fish that they were trying to get out of the nets. And he was like, and we can just do it with this little light. And if we put the light on, they stay away from it. And our shrimp catches are, you know, more robust, and we're not harming other endangered species by doing it. And his sheer joy and enthusiasm for solving a problem that helped people, that helped the environment, was something that really sticks with me. It was such a cool opportunity. And I love working in a space where I get to talk to people who are really thinking about, how do I innovate? How do I create? How do I research in a way that solves the problem and helps people and helps the environment? And that's something that gives me hope, and it gives me a lot of motivation to keep coming back and doing my job, because it's so great to be able to interact with so many different people working on very difficult interdisciplinary problems, but with this excitement and vigor and sheer joy that just makes it a pleasure to be able to work here and work with folks like you.
Well, thank you. And I guess the answer is all of you. You're the reason we do what we do. And I just want to say a special thank you to our panelists who are here, and to Alexandra for joining us from afar. I think you did a great job. And I think with that, Tony, we're ready to close out our forum.
Thanks, and really, I would not presume to try to summarize some of the things we've discussed any more than this last panel, which really I think has done a great job in crystallizing, as we had hoped, some of the discussions we've been having over the last 2 days. And so I'm going to just conclude with a few thank yous and a few sort of macro and micro thoughts. One is, again, to repeat what Avalon said. We really, a lot of work went into this, and as Avalon mentioned, the members of the forum planning team have been meeting regularly. You have to understand, we spent most of our time deciding what we were not going to do. There was so much going on. We tried to figure out how do we focus on these key issues that we would hope would elevate some of the work that is being done. So really, thanks to them who have been working very hard. Thanks very much to September Marr, to Janet Reamer, to Carl Villakoba, and Alea Satko and my staff, who's really been making sure, and also the technical staff here at the venue who have helped us work this, because this is an experiment for us to do this hybrid format. So really came across extremely well. So thank you. And again, I want to re-engage a couple of basic messages that have been repeated. Again, this is a forum, but it is, again, a highlight of ongoing activities and opportunities for you to get engaged with the specific Marco work, but also with each other. I know I am leaving specifically with 3 follow-up meetings with people that I have engaged here to follow up some issues. I see Nicole Jean, and I was going to say, if I could say 2 months ago that I would see Nicole Jean as part of my ocean community, I wouldn't have known that. But now I know that she's part of our ocean community, even though it might not have been obvious 2 months ago. So thank you for that. And I've seen that throughout this, that there are people in the ocean community, not only the ones we get the day-to-day pleasure and enjoyment out of working with that really give us the privilege of the working in the field we do, but recognizing that it is in other folks' lives. I propose a session next time on the enthusiasm that Kristi Lieske's daughter has. How do we capture the enthusiasm and have a session about the inspiration of the ocean and what it inspires in people? I think that's something that is hard to sort of capture in the data, but maybe is what brings a lot of people to the table in ways that we would not imagine through our data collection efforts. A couple of observations, and I would very much, I hesitate ever to disagree a little bit with Laura McKay, but I will say she said something which I've been thinking about, which was the fish can't tell us what they want. I actually think they can. We just haven't learned to listen properly. So I do think we need to listen properly to what the environment and fish want, and think a little bit more about what that brings to the table. Maybe scientists will express it in data and marine mammal data, but maybe we'll just have to just watch and observe and try to live with some of these creatures in a different way, in a more compatible way. So I'd like to think about that. In the hopeful note, I don't know if Dr. Weiss is here still, but she mentioned that we just designated this area a hope spot. And really thinking about that really gives me hope, because I know how hard she has been working for many, many years. That really started at the estuarine level with local waterways groups and estuaries groups. They're still out there, everybody. We haven't quite engaged the power, not only of the power that we have as a regional ocean partnership, but the power of our partners who are out in the communities fighting for the things that are important to them, the communities, whether it's coming back with Gowanus Creek up the road here that's been a Superfund site for 1,000,000 years, or your local watershed group. I think there's a lot more power out there that we have yet to engage fully to create and share the benefits of what we have. The other macro observations really are things that we don't discuss, but I really am taken, who's been kind of at the side of this effort for a long time now. How much has changed since this started? I mean, the incredible partnerships that are now being manifest through ROSA and the Regional Wildlife Collaborative, the capacities that we've demonstrated, the ability, as Deerin said, for the regional ocean partnerships to have impact and be legitimized and do that is really remarkable. But other things have changed since the last time we did this. We had the pandemic. So at the same time the pandemic comes and we see the power of science to address an incredible global pandemic challenge, yet at the same time, the belief in science is decreasing. Thinking about AI data, we're talking about data sets. That's happening, people. So thinking about what's changing in that world and how the future is going to be different based on conditions outside of the wonderful world. But we have a grand experiment, which is the ocean. We need to be thinking about how the world is changing around us, but use the power that we have as individuals and the allies that we can develop in support of our efforts and sort of what we're trying to do, but within that broader context of how the world is changing and how, again, with the climate crisis, the reality is that we are now managing for the future. To steal a line from Margaret Leinen from Scripps Oceanographic Institute, who was at Monmouth a few weeks back, I think it was a great way to summarize really what we need, what our job is. The ocean is not optional. So if we can always remember that and realize it's not a trade-off question, it really is a question of understanding the essential values that are presented in a personal way, in an environmental way, in an economic way, and recognize that the ocean is an optional and we'll all go home pretty happy at the end of the day. So thank you very much for coming. Appreciate it.